So we're moving on to tonight's keynote speaker. And you know that these awards are European, truly pan-European, and we have some 20 European countries represented here today. But for our keynote speaker, we will go global. We will be joined today by the Director for Political Parties at the National Democratic Institute of the United States of America, one of the most important institutions in the world that looks after the health of political parties and how political parties can contribute to strengthen democracy. Birgitta Ohlsson has an amazing political career in Sweden. She has been a member of parliament from 2002 to 2018 for 16 years. She headed the women's wing of her party as well. She was in government, being the Minister for European Affairs, how convenient, but also for democratic issues from 2010 to 2014. But for people in my generations and for countless generations of women in politics in Sweden and in Europe, she's something as well of a feminist icon. Please give a big hand of applause to Birgitta Ohlsson.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for this very, very generous introduction. And I felt a bit, around this very glittery moment that the only time when I was in politics for 25 years as a minister and member of parliament, leading the youth wing and the women's wing of the Liberal Party, I was nominated and awarded, and I won a prize once, and that was at the Swedish Gay Gala. I was voted the heterosexual of the year for my fight when it comes to LGBTQI plus individuals' rights. And I think sometimes galas, or when you have a pride, it's very much comparable to what we're doing here tonight. It's about being proud, it's about being joyful, but it's also about very serious things that we are facing in Europe and the world today. The history book on the shelf, it's always repeating itself. Some of you might have heard that tune many times, at least if you're my generation or maybe older. And I know that the second semi-final of the Eurovision is starting in like just a few minutes. So to keep your attention during my speech here, while you are maybe simultaneously televoting for the best song, well, maybe rather on your country or maybe the country that normally is supporting your country. It's happening very often in the Eurovision. I will drop a few Eurovision references throughout my speech. Well, what's another day for democracy? Can freedom rise like a phoenix? Will there be more hallelujah moments of euphoria for liberty in 2023? And most importantly, can we wish for ambition, freedom for the Ukrainian people? And some of you are here tonight. Insieme, l'Europa non è lontana. Europe is not far away. Slava Ukraini. But is Europe repeating itself as ABBA sang almost 50 years ago in Brighton? Are we facing the fourth wave of democracy or the 18th consecutive year of democratic backsliding next year? Maybe Lade Svinge tonight at the Innovation in Politics Awards, recognizing the creative politicians from across Europe who show the courage to break new ground to find the challenges, solutions for today's challenges. But to be frank, is there much to celebrate about democracy nowadays? We are in the midst of the 17th consecutive year of democratic backsliding, according to Freedom House. VDEM reports that 45 countries around the world are in autocratization at the moment. 50% of the world democracies are in retreat, according to International IDEA. And half of the countries measured by the Economist Democracy Index report either stagnation or declined democracy. And the levels of democracy enjoyed by the average global citizens today are back to 1986, the year Reagan met Gorbachev. And it's very easy to become nostalgic. The first time I visited Warsaw was in the mid-1990s. I had just turned 20. My country, Sweden, had joined the European Union, and the world looked so hopeful and promising. And growing up in the late 1980s and early 90s was an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything else. The fall of almost like all the evil things that you could imagine happening one after the other. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, and the end of apartheid in South Africa. But also going back to Poland, as the Vice Mayor was emphasizing earlier, in the first half of the 20th century, no European capital had a more tragic history than Warsaw. And I really liked what you said, Warsaw, so war, because this is kind of unfortunately symbolizing many parts of the Polish history. And when I walk on my memory lane in Warsaw, I always go back to the Krochmalna Street, the street that symbolizes so much history from the darkest hours of European history, but also the greatest hours of courage. Today, actually, at this moment, is it exactly 8 years ago? It's the last days, 8 years ago, of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, one of the bravest moments of resistance during the Second World War. And maybe resistance should be the new buzzword for all of us. Change resilience and use resistance instead, I think, to fight for the values that we cherish so much. But the Krochmalna Street is also the street of my favorite writer, Isaac Singer. He once said something that is so relevant for us today, making the case for democracy. He said, "If you keep on saying that things are going to be bad, you have a good chance of being a prophet." And I might be preaching for the choir here tonight, but we need to use the strong narratives that we have for democracy. And we need to get out of this negative, self-fulfilling prophecy. Women, life, freedom. The fight for freedom in Iran that we've seen in the streets during the last 6 or 8 months. Moldova's resistance towards Russia, and Zambia's inspirational democracy reforms. And democracy is delivering. Democratization, it leads to economic growth, on average 20% higher GDP per capita after 25 years. And the high level of democracy leads to 94% less infant mortality than in dictatorship countries. And people are even living longer in democratic societies, and even the roads are better in a democracy. And the classical one, democracies do not start wars against each other. We need to unite for democracy if we want to defend democracy, and if not now, when? There is a world before and after February 24th last year, the day when Russia invaded Ukraine. Putin's attack on Ukraine has done more to unite the world's democracies, at least maybe in this part of the world, than anything else since the end of the Cold War. And I think it's impossible to ever imagine a stronger, more convincing and important game-changer story in modern times about why democracy matters so much than what we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment. Because the war in Ukraine provides an opening to strengthening democracies by showing the importance of cross-party collaboration between democratic parties, no matter the ideology or background. At the National Democratic Institute, NDI, we believe that such cross-party collaboration is kind of the game changer that can unite democracies worldwide and push back on the democratic backsliding. That's why we're creating new opportunities for democratic parties worldwide, across ideologies, to unite to defend democracy. Because countries like China and Russia, they are much further along in spreading their authoritarian model than Western democracies would like to believe. 2 months ago, the most powerful dictators in the world, China's Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin, toasted in champagne in Moscow while discussing a shared future for humanity. China is no longer just building roads in Africa. It's now building an authoritarian model for export based on this vision of one-party rule. And likewise, Russia is expanding its ambitions beyond just proxy warfare in the global south. Populists, authoritarians, and polarizing forces are thriving because democratic political parties are failing to unite and are too weak to protect the core values of the democratic processes. We've seen in far too many countries that traditional parties have been kidnapped by charlatan reformers in century-old democracies. And both new and old parties have jumped on this populist train or joined coalitions far from their political roots just to gain power. And it's not as easy to reform parties as it is popular to mix this toxic authoritarian cocktail. Well, I may not be a political bartender, but I see globally how many politicians tend to mix all these toxic ingredients of polarization, disinformation, populism, and nationalism. And it's so easy to drink and to serve, but it leaves you with a political hangover that could last for decades. I was telling my mother-in-law, Selina, yesterday, hey, I'm going to Warsaw tomorrow. She was born in the Polish city of Łódź in 1948. Her parents were one of the few people in the family that actually survived the Holocaust, and they decided to stay in Poland after the war. 3.5 million Jews lived in Poland in 1939, more than in any other country in Europe, and the Nazis killed almost 90% of them here in Poland. And guess what, I told Selina? I'm going to speak at the Palace of Culture and Science. And she was laughing and sent me some of these emojis with funny faces. The palace was opened in 1955 when Selina was 7 years old by the same communist regime that made her family stateless refugees when the Jewish population was kicked out of the country in 1968. And as we've heard, the palace was built on the initiative of the dictator Joseph Stalin from Soviet Union as a gift of the Soviet people for the Poles. Well, he could have given them independence, free and fair elections, and freedom of expression, but he gave them this palace. Isn't it ironic? Well, that might not be a Eurovision song, but it's still kind of good anyway. But isn't it ironic that we're celebrating freedom and awarding people today that are building democracy across Europe in a building initiated by Stalin, one of the worst dictators in history, tearing Europe apart? It's very ironic, but it's also very, very great. And in the city of Warsaw today, a bright, shining light in Europe, I would say. Warsaw city led by our host, Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski, that signed the Pact of Free Cities, a cooperation agreement between mayors of Bratislava, Budapest, Prague, and Warsaw, promoting, I quote, common values of freedom, human dignity, democracy, equality, rule of law, social justice, tolerance, and cultural diversity. Values sadly challenged in Europe and in European Union countries today. I think it's shameful that that is happening. And that is why we need to show that courage beats prejudice every single time. To quote ABBA again, well, I am Swedish, so I need to do that. The history book on the shelf, it's not always repeating itself. We know that democracy is not a fairy tale, but it requires heroes of our time. It's just about making your mind up and together, unite, unite Europe. Thank you, and do not miss Eurovision final on Saturday.
Thank you so much. A big hand to Birgitta. Thank you so much.